Next, we're excited to welcome the leader of the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, back to the RAA Leaders Conference. The Honorable David Pekoske was first confirmed in 2017 and confirmed again by the current administration in 2022. He leads a workforce of 60,000 across 400 airports with a singular focus: to ensure the traveling public is safe and secure at every stage. Prior to his role, he was the Vice Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard and has been twice awarded the Homeland Security Distinguished Service Medal. Administrator Pekoske is a well-respected leader, known for frequent, direct engagement with industry, including RAA, and a truly collaborative approach to security. He's earned my admiration for his steadfast support and advocacy for a healthy TSA workforce, something that our audience can certainly relate to. We look forward to hearing his update. Please join me in warmly welcoming Administrator David Pekoske.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks, my pleasure. Thanks. Well, Faye, thank you very much for that great introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I might be your last speaker still? Yes. So what I propose to do is I've got some things I'd like to convey to you. And then I really want to leave enough time for any questions, comments that you want to make to me, because that helps me do my job. And I really do enjoy getting feedback from the audience on anything that relates to TSA. But before I begin, let me just highlight the terrific relationship we have with RAA. I mean, Faye has been an incredible partner for TSA. We meet on a regular basis, either in person or virtually. And when you do it that way, you have the opportunity to raise things that you probably want to raise, but it wouldn't warrant an independent phone call necessarily. And so I think that regular dialogue that we have is really important for me to understand the concerns that RAA members have with anything that impacts aviation security and actions that TSA is either taking or contemplating taking. And just that regular touch point I find incredibly valuable. So Faye, thank you so much for giving up your time to be able to interact with me. And when we have these calls, it's Faye and her top team and me and my top team. And so we get everybody in the room, we're all aligned when we're done with the meetings. I'd also highlight Navoyo Reinch, who's the Senior Vice President for Safety and Regulation here at RAA. Navoyo has been a long-time partner of TSA's. She's a member of the Aviation Security Advisory Committee, which is really just a wonderful advisory committee wherein we get really good advice on things, sometimes on issues that are really tough to handle, that we get a sense from the industry based on their perspectives from other experts in the aviation field as to how TSA should approach a certain issue. ASAC meets 4 times a year, 3 times inside and 1 time for a public meeting. It's been a tremendous sounding board for me. Navoyo has been on the ASAC for coming on 8 years. So really a good, steady voice. Everybody around the ASAC table knows her, and she represents your interests, I think, incredibly well. I had the opportunity before I was introduced to listen to the tail end of the prior panel, and I would just highlight that the key to good governance is having good dialogue between agencies, between the public, between associations, industry members, and the Hill. And the 4 people you had up, Rance and Simone from CS&T, which is also TSA's Oversight Committee in the Senate, and from Hunter and Brian from T&I in the House. Now, while not TSA's Oversight Committee in the House, we do have a lot of interaction with T&I, and in fact, TSA was part of T&I's oversight in our very first years of existence as an agency. TSA has been in place now for 22 years. We just had a remembrance ceremony, as we do every single year, for 9/11, 2 weeks and a day ago. What we do is we recommit to our pledge to not have a recurrence of a terrorist attack on the United States transportation system ever again. We've been successful for 22 years, but we've only been successful because we've been able to do it in partnership. It's partnership with you, partnership with other entities within the transportation sector, beyond aviation, and certainly aviation included, in partnership with our overseers on Capitol Hill and our counterpart agencies in the federal government. One of the things that we're trying very hard to do, and I think we've been successful at doing this, is to present as best we can a consolidated U.S. government position on issues. And so I talk with FAA all the time. I've talked to every administrator of FAA many, many times. Look forward to talking to the next administrator once confirmed and he gets into the position. I think it's really just very important for you. It's very important for us to make sure that that dialogue is strong. And one of the things I always think about, and Faye mentioned that I had a career in the Coast Guard before I came into this position. Coast Guard does both safety and security. And we always had a saying in the Coast Guard that safety and security are two sides of the same coin. Things that you do in safety oftentimes have a security impact and vice versa. And you need to make sure that you're well coordinated on things that you're doing for us from a security perspective to make sure that our safety counterparts in the Department of Transportation are part of that decision process and incorporate some of the things we do into their own safety regulations. But in thinking about 9/11, one of the things that I think about all the time, and I'll talk a little bit about the threat, but not too much, but the thing that resonates with me is that, on 9/11, we had 19 people kill 2,977 people. And, when you look at the threat now, while ISIS and Al-Qaeda are smaller than what they used to be, they don't need to be large to be effective. And so I always think of that. I convey that to my team and to our partners all the time. And so foreign-based and foreign-inspired terrorists are still very much a concern of ours. Sometimes I hear people say, well, hey, TSA is focused on a 9/11-like scenario. We are focused on the future, but the future, in some cases, looks a little bit like a 9/11-like scenario in some ways. For example, passengers will often comment about how many more years are we going to have to keep taking off our shoes if you're not a pre-check passenger. Believe it or not, that is still an avenue of attack that terrorist organizations contemplate using. And so until that diminishes, that requirement will stay on, or until we find a technology solution to it, which we are working on. The changes in the threat, though, are really important for this discussion this afternoon. One change is an increase in domestic violence. We've seen it all across our country, not just in the aviation sector. That's a concern of ours, and it relates directly to the next one, which is the insider threat. As we get better and better, stronger and stronger in securing our checkpoint operations, in securing our air cargo operations collectively. It's not just TSA, it's everybody. Other avenues will be explored and tested. And so we put out some new requirements for aviation worker screening, for example, to address directly the insider threat piece that we see as an increasing threat vector. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to add capacity and add capability without just trading where we have current capability off to a new threat, because these threats are additive. The other threat that I think is very much worth mentioning, and many of you may have already seen and are working on our directives, our modifications to airport and air carrier security plans to include cybersecurity protections. And these are really designed to do two things. They're designed to increase the level of protection that an individual entity will have against a successful cyber attack. They're also designed to ensure that if successfully attacked at any level, that entity can be resilient and restore their service in a manner that will instill public confidence and will get service back up and running as soon as it can be. As I look at the threat picture, it's more challenging today than when it was when I first came into this job 6 years ago, and we continue to work on it. One of the things that I would share with you about working in TSA and working with all of you is every day is an adventure in a positive way. Every day we get to tackle hard problems and do really good work on behalf of the American people. Our mission, too, is to secure the transportation system. So that's important, transportation system. Secure the transportation system while allowing the freedom of movement of people and cargo. That last piece is very, very important to us. And you've seen in our security operations the ability now with technology and some changes in procedures to make the facilitation of passenger travel a little bit better over time, and it will continue to get better. And as I introduce that mission statement, the thing I would overlay it with, and I'd overlay the threat discussion we just had, with the fact that fortunately, the U.S. aviation system in general, and I know you have your own specific challenges, but the aviation system in general has had an incredibly robust recovery. I'll use this past summer in terms of passenger volumes. On an average day this summer, 2.5 million people through our checkpoints. That's a significant increase over what they were in 2019. Overall, if you compared last year to this year, between a 10 and a 15% difference in passenger travel. The other thing that is interesting is that passenger travel has increased in a little bit of an irregular way, sometimes positive in that the peaks are a little bit less peaky in the mornings and in the mid to late afternoons. So the curve is a little flatter, but the volume is absolutely there. So we see all of the threat changes and all of the things that we have on our collective plates and the challenge of a rapidly recovering aviation system. We expect that this recovery will continue through the balance of this calendar year and into next calendar year. And we're still looking at forward bookings that the carriers receive to be able to fine tune our projections. But one of the things that's really important for us is to make sure that our staffing keeps pace with the growing passenger volume levels. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But there are two issues that I know many of you have seen that I think are particularly important for me to highlight this afternoon. The first is firearms. And we put a lot of messaging out on firearms. And I would say, and just very briefly, is you cannot carry a firearm in any accessible property into the sterile area of an airport or on board an aircraft. But if you want to travel with a firearm, you can absolutely do that. You just need to declare the firearm to the airline, properly secure it in your checked baggage. And so that's been our messaging. We will continue to put that messaging out, particularly as we run up into the Thanksgiving holiday period, because last year we had 6,542 firearms detected in our checkpoints in a calendar year. That's a lot. And the other statistic that's very concerning should be, and I know is concerning to all of us, is that 88% of those firearms last year were loaded. So that presents a significant risk that we just need to continue to thwart through our screening process. Already this year, we've seen an increase in the absolute number of firearms detected. So we had 6,542 last year. We expect this year we'll probably have about 6,700. So the absolute number is going up. The concern we have, in addition to the number going up, is that the percent loaded now is at 93%. So very, very high numbers of firearms in our checkpoints. No need for it because firearms can be carried during travel, like I said. It just needs to be properly declared, secured, and put in checked baggage. The other thing that we have seen, as has the FAA, as has the FBI, as have most of the carriers, is that there has been a steady level of unruly passenger behavior, both in aircraft at altitude, in aircraft at the gate itself, and in our screening checkpoints. A lot of people thought that the level of unruly passenger behavior would taper way off after the mask mandate went down. And the verbal assaults indeed did that. But the physical assaults, the ones that I pay attention to all the time, have not. They have stayed steady or, if anything, have gone up a little bit. We are focused, as is the FAA and the FBI and the Department of Justice, on this. And I would just offer to all of you kudos to your gate agents and to your flight attendants, basically the cabin crew, and oftentimes the flight deck crew for denying boarding to a passenger who is clearly and generally intoxicated and shouldn't be on board that flight, because solving it on deck, at the gate, or even before the gate is certainly preferable to trying to solve it in flight. I have some good news with respect to TSA staffing levels, and I know you have challenges, and we had the same challenges over the past couple of years of getting our workforce back up to the levels that it needed to be at. We had the benefit, though, of not having laid off any of our workforce. We had full funding support from the Congress, so a huge benefit to TSA and to the traveling public from Congress to do that. We did allow normal attrition to occur and didn't recruit So we started the pandemic recovery at a higher level than most other entities in the aviation sector. Faye mentioned in the introduction that my key area of focus over the past several years has been to fix the pay issue in TSA. And you may or may not know this, but since its founding 22 years ago, TSA employees were not paid at the same pay scale as everybody else in the federal government. And my pitch to the Congress was, hey, it's time to stop this phenomenon. It's hurting us. It's very difficult for us to recruit. And importantly, it's very difficult for us to retain the talent that we have. We were seeing in some of our checkpoints the average experience level going down to a point that we thought was not advisable. And so we worked very hard to explain to the Congress what we want to do. Sometimes it's portrayed as a pay raise. I don't say that. It is portrayed as the opportunity to put TSA on the same footing as everybody else who works in the federal government. Congress appropriated it in FY23, so this current fiscal year, about to end in a few days, and they approved it for start on the 1st of July. So we started paying the general schedule pay rate on the 1st of July. Over the course of time, we have seen a significant reduction in our attrition, as we expected, and a significant increase in the number of people applying for TSA positions. So right now, we're about 1% below where we think we need to be in staff, which is basically within the envelope that you're typically in a robust operational period, between 1% and 3%. So that has been very successful and provided the benefit that we envisioned that it would provide. The other thing that it does clearly is it makes the men and women who work in TSA feel like, when they look at their paycheck and their direct deposit, feel like they're being valued for what they do. So I think this has been absolutely critically important. It's game-changing for this agency. My concern is that, generally in the appropriations process, when something begins in a prior fiscal year, it hardly ever begins with full year funding, because everybody recognizes that you can't hire on people right away, and it's going to take you a while to implement a massive pay restructuring. So there's several months that everybody assumes it's going to take to be able to get ready. Completely understandable. I wholeheartedly agree with that. So that's why we got 1 quarter year's funding in FY23. But what typically happens automatically is that amount is what's called annualized, which means 1 quarter funding gets increased by 3 quarters worth, so you have 4 quarters worth of funding going forward into the new fiscal year. That level of funding has been supported by the Senate Appropriations Committee in their initial look at our appropriations request. In the House took a different view and decided that only the uniformed officers in TSA would continue at that pay rate that we're currently paying. What that does not include, our explosives experts, which are critical, obviously, to the smooth operation of our checkpoints, all of our canine handlers, all of our federal air marshals. I just talked about unruly passengers and insider threat. Our federal air marshals are the law enforcement entity in TSA that have law enforcement authority in any transportation hub and aboard any U.S. flagged aircraft. It doesn't include the entire intelligence apparatus of TSA. It doesn't include all of our vetting specialists, the people that look at passenger reservations and make sure that we are properly vetting that passenger before they even show up at the airport, and really key to our entire screening process. So I have petitioned heavily to the House and to the Senate for the Senate support to make sure that this pay raise carries over completely and fully into fiscal year 24. I hope that that will be the case. I'm confident that that will be the case, but I just wanted to highlight that to you so that should it not be, you've heard it from me before the fiscal year completes. So it's not a surprise if we have to make some very drastic reductions in how we manage our screening operations overall. The other thing I would address with you is the risk of a government shutdown. The prior panel talked about it a little bit. I would just observe that when this happens, people that are essential employees, which is the vast majority of TSA, so we have 62,000 employees in TSA, just about 59,000 would be essential employees, but nobody gets paid. And so what ends up happening is you're working without pay. We will continue hiring, and we will continue training because that's authorized in our governing legal framework. But for me, the important thing to keep in mind is the huge personal impact this has on people. We had experience with this, unfortunately, in 2019 when we had the 35-day government shutdown. It's very, very hard for anybody to go for 20 days, 30 days, 40 days or longer without receiving a paycheck. It impacts ability of people to get to work, to put gas in their vehicles, to pay for parking. It impacts their ability to pay the individuals that provide care for their children at home. So it has a huge impact on my workforce personally, and it will have over time an impact on our ability to screen passengers within our standards of 10 minutes or less for a pre-check passenger and 30 minutes or less for a non-pre-check passenger. So that's a key concern of mine, and just know that for me, going over the next year or so, I have three guidelines, three key areas that I focus on all the time as the administrator. The first one is people first. We are a people-intensive organization. The workforce in TSA needs to know and needs to see that I have their back, and that I do everything I can to make sure that they're fairly compensated, they're properly trained, and they're well supported in conducting their operations. The second key priority is technology, and I'll talk about that next. We need to continue to make investments in technology because that will allow us to be more effective in screening, for sure. It will allow us to be more efficient in screening, and it will allow for a better customer experience as passengers go through our screening process. And the third is partnerships, and I'll conclude with that. But let me just talk about the technology piece for a second. For those of you that, and I think that's pretty much everybody in this room, that goes through our screening checkpoints on a regular basis, hopefully you see that pretty much every piece of technology, and it depends, if you go through a series of airports, you definitely will see all three pieces of technology. Some we haven't fully deployed it yet because we don't have the funds to fully deploy at this point. But the first thing you see is our identity verification process. That's all redone over the past 3 or 4 years. It's largely automated now. When you stand in front of that first officer in the TSA screening checkpoint, what that person is doing is they are verifying your identity, and what they're doing now with the new technology is a machine will come back and tell them that, yes, your driver's license from the state of Michigan is indeed properly marked and a valid credential from the state of Michigan. It will also, at the same time, take some data from your driver's license, basically 3 fields: your name, your date of birth, and your photo, and take the name, date of birth, and match that against our secure flight database, which is our manifest of all the airline reservations that have been made even up to a minute or two before a passenger shows up in the screening checkpoint. And we will make sure that the passenger we vetted is indeed this passenger. It's critically important. It's the entering argument into our screening process so that a passenger that might be a passenger who needs additional screening doesn't by accident get pre-check screening. So it's very important that we match that up. And then last is to take the image on a passenger's driver's license or passport, digitize it, and compare it to the image of the passenger before the officer. Now, right now, a lot of that image comparison is done manually. It's done by eyeball. An officer looks at the passenger, looks at the driver's license. We make the image larger so it's easier to make the comparison. But where we are going is into facial recognition, and we're testing this out. You'll see it at Reagan Airport when you depart on your way home if you use Reagan as your airport of departure. Essentially, you step up, the camera will take an image of you, and it will digitally match the camera image with the image that's on your credential. So it's a one-to-one comparison. It's comparing your credential image to the image the camera sees. It's a high-definition camera, multiple cameras with the proper lighting. The algorithms are all to the highest NIST, National Institute for the Standards of Technology standard. Now, as we're doing this, we're still in the operational assessment phase. Any passenger who doesn't feel comfortable with facial recognition technology for whatever reason, they don't have to tell us a reason. We don't ask for a reason. If they want to opt out of it, they just ask the officer to opt out. They will not lose their place in line, and will just do their identity verification, that check of photos manually. So that's all of this is a pretty significant improvement over where we were. When I first came into this position, literally you'd hand a driver's license to the officer. They would take some lights, UV lights, and a loop magnifying lens and make sure that everything was good with your credential. It's very, very hard to do that. Accuracy on the manual process is about 85%. Accuracy in the automatic process is 99.7% in our testing to date. But I just want to emphasize, passengers can opt out. They don't lose their place in line, and it's no challenge from us as to the reasons for their opt-out. It's a privilege that they have, and we will continue to do that while we're doing the operational assessment. Next step in the screening process is the carry-on bag X-ray process. We now use increasingly computed tomography, or CT, or CAT scan X-ray systems. The reason we switched to these is because they are just so much more accurate than the prior X-ray technology. Prior X-ray technology took an image from the top, an image from the side, and gave you a two-dimensional view of a carry-on bag. The CT technology actually has an antenna array that physically goes all the way around a bag and produces an image that way. And so what officers can do is they can actually electronically take out a laptop or an iPad. That's the reason why in standard lanes with CT technology, we no longer ask passengers to take out liquids, aerosols, and gels, or to take out laptops and iPads. So this is a benefit to passengers. What passengers do see, and we need to do a better job in messaging this, the way CT technology works is when your bag goes into the tunnel, the bag stops for a couple of seconds while that antenna array goes around and takes the image. That's different from the old technology, particularly in pre-check, where the bags just kept on moving. And so passengers will see that and think, uh-oh, there must be something wrong with my bag, or my bag got lost, or why is it taking so long? And we just need to message that a little bit better to say, hey, this is a technology change, and don't, expect that your bag is going to sit there for a second or two while the image is being captured. But we're marrying this X-ray technology up with better accessible property or carry-on bag handling systems. We have some airports now that have what are called automatic screening lanes, where 5 or 6 passengers can divest at the same time, so you're not necessarily waiting for the passenger in front of you. It's much more efficient in our checkpoint operations. So that's the CT X-ray piece. We're about 36% of the way through, so about a third of the way through, much more to go and much more funding needed to carry through with it. Last piece is the on-person screening for standard passengers. You go into a machine, put your hands up at shoulder level, and it scans your body looking for anomalies on your body. That's good technology, but the software needed to be updated. We've since done that, and so as of June, all the software has been updated, improves the ability to detect, lowers the false alarm rate. A lower false alarm rate means fewer pat-downs. So overall, passengers should see a much more automated and in most cases a speedier process through our checkpoints. I would just caution though that what we found over the course of time is whenever we introduce a new technology, it takes usually 3 or 4 months for the passenger population in an airport and for our officers to get used to it. And so initially it might take a little bit longer. It's just because with CT technology, for example, the X-ray, you have to put your bag in a bin. That's an extra step, didn't exist before. It just takes sometimes a little bit more time for everybody to get used to that. Let me conclude by kind of where I began, is just to thank all of you for your partnership. I mean, really, honestly, sincerely, we could not do our job. We could not protect this aviation system, this transportation system, were it not for the partnership of carriers, airports, associations, other federal agencies. I mean, it's just critical to our overall success. And what I would, I mentioned our vision to you a few minutes ago. Let me just, or our mission rather, let me just give you our vision and just ask you, based on what I've said in your own experience, if that kind of rings true to you, because you all had a hand in putting it together when we published this vision in 2018. But the vision is an agile security agency. So agility means, hey, we're looking at threats and technology as it develops and trying as rapidly as we can to put it in place. Sometimes when you do it rapidly, you might have to fine-tune how you do it, but we've taken speed over perfection any day of the week just because the new technology improves our security effectiveness by a huge margin. But an agile security agency embodied by a professional workforce That to me means a workforce that's compensated as a professional workforce. And that is my number one funding priority for fiscal '24. Goes on to say engages the public and its partners. Doing that here, have done it consistently with FAA and Navojo and other associations. I don't know that our partnerships could be any stronger than what they are today, but we will continue. I mean, one of the beauty parts about working in this industry is no day is like yesterday, like I said, and so it just allows us to continue together to find solutions to make sure that our aviation system stays secure. And then the vision statement concludes with to outmatch a dynamic threat. Talked about the threat as we talked about the 22nd remembrance of 9/11. Threat's very dynamic, and we need to be dynamic as well. So none of this to me reads like we can just do what we did yesterday and be satisfied with the status quo. It means we need to be leaning forward, leaning in to the issues that we face. I look forward to continuing to lead in with all of you. The bar gets higher all the time, and we reach that bar together. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions or take any comments that you'd like to provide. Thanks.
Do you have the microphone on?
There
Okay.
you go.
Thank you for your leadership, your steady hand. It's a fantastic update today. I've seen the data over the years about firearms. You covered all the other territories, so I thought I'd go back to firearms for a second. It seems like the penalties in public for firearms for individuals are pretty severe, but I never hear about anybody getting fined or very few times arrested. I mean, is there more, as those numbers keep climbing and climbing, is there more that can be done?
Yeah, and we're always looking for more to be done because obviously if the number keeps going up, we're not doing enough. Every single person that has a firearm detected in the checkpoint, we do an investigation of what happened to make sure we have all the facts. And then if the facts indicate, we proceed with a civil penalty every single time. The percentage of civil penalties to individuals is very high because it's pretty hard to explain why this firearm is here. And we have signs, and you actually acknowledge, even though, I'll readily admit, I don't think anybody here says they would agree that they read all of the advisements when they check into their flight. But the fine is there. The other thing that we do is if you're a pre-check passenger, you lose pre-check for 5 years. That's a significant issue for pre-check passengers because, I'm going to assume that most of us here in this room today are pre-check. Can you imagine taking your shoes off all the time and taking your coat off, your belt buckle, you're taking your belt off? I mean, you just get used to that convenience that is embodied in a trusted traveler population. The other thing is that in the most egregious cases, we do pursue criminal penalties, and we work through U.S. attorneys. We just had a case in Atlanta. You might remember this. It occurred a year plus ago. Had an individual, had a duffel bag, had a firearm in his duffel bag, went through the x-ray. The officer saw it, pulled the bag aside, moved it over to a table to work with the police to open up the bag to take the firearm out. Individual saw this happening, lunged over at the table, grabbed at the bag, unfortunately discharged a round into the table because it was a loaded firearm. But it went into the table. That was a good thing. He just got sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. So, and we published these things so people know. One of the things we're going to try over the holiday period is at our identity verification stop in our checkpoint operations is just to remind people, every single person, just a reminder, you cannot carry a firearm. If you have a firearm, you can travel with it. You just need to check it in your check bags. We've piloted this in some airports. It seems to be working pretty well. For us, hey, I don't want to see firearms in checkpoints. Don't want to see them in sterile areas of the airport or on board aircraft. If we can prevent it from getting there in the first place, that's a win for everybody. Plus, people that have firearms end up delaying, hundreds of people in the process because, we have to shut that lane down for a period of time. We try to do it as quickly as we can, but we have to do it safely before we can reopen it. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last piece of that.
Can you update us on the status of TSA transitioning from oversight to administering known crew member program.
To administering which program again?
Known crew member program.
Oh, a known crew member, thank you.
KCM.
Yes, known crew member program, we are working on bringing that program in-house to TSA. And right now we're at the stage where we're trying to decide and settle on what capabilities the new known crew member program needs to have. What I've said to all the users of the known crew member program, flight attendants, pilots, first officers, is once we determine what characteristics the program needs to have, we'll bring them in to help us with the design. So the design is something that functionally works for them. This is going to take us some time, unfortunately, to do, but I'm committed to getting it done. And I stand by the known crew member program. It's unique internationally. A lot of other countries don't do it at all. But I stand by the efficacy of that program. I just want to make sure we do it a little bit more completely than what we've been doing in the past. Thanks.
Thanks. Administrator Pekoske, thanks for your presentation. We appreciate your leadership. You brought up the point about that the majority of your employees are deemed essential in the event of a government shutdown with a sigh of relief. That's good to hear, as well as the air traffic controllers. I believe the last time, though, that this happened, without getting paid, there was legislation that was floated and it was out there for some time about making sure that your employees and the air traffic controllers would, in fact, be paid on a regular basis in the event of another shutdown. And, of course, now we're approaching that. Mm-hmm. I believe that legislation died a quiet death earlier this year. And maybe this would have been a question for the panel that was up here before. Mm-hmm. Where are we on with respect to getting your employees paid if we do have a shutdown? And is there some sort of mechanism that would even allow that in the first place? Thank you.
Yeah, that did not pass. But what did pass is a guarantee that they would be paid, just not paid on time. And therein lies, that's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad they're going to get paid. And we know historically that we always pay people for the hours worked. It's just making it a little bit more certain. But the longer it goes, the harder it is for families and for individual officers to be able just to afford to get, like I said, to get themselves to work, to afford to support their families. So one of the things we saw in the 35-day shutdown in 2019, really heartwarming in many, many ways, was all the support we received from airports and from air carriers and from other associations and communities that basically recognized that everybody was working without pay and that it was getting harder and harder as each day went by. So that had the effect of really bringing us closer to the communities that were there. But really, we should pay people if they're working and pay them on time. Thanks. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.